peace, passions calmed, is free from sin, and has become Brahman. So he gives 3 things that happen. The first thing is Shanta Rajasam, the Rajas, the passions, this restlessness which makes you go out into the world and in a frenzied seeking, pursuit of worldly things. That has to come. Then Prashanta Manasam, the mind gets calm. And the third, Akalmasham, free from sin. Sin means vasanas. Sin is anything that agitates your mind. Vasanas or desires. Vasanas are nothing but unmanifest desires. So, desires are the root cause of your mental agitation. When the desire is not fulfilled, the mind gets agitated. So, when you're free from desires, you're free from mental agitations, free from sin. When these 3 things happen, then you become Brahma Bhutam, means you become Brahman. There is a time lag between these 3 and the becoming of Brahman. And that time lag, that interval between this and the transformation is what you have to be patient with. And this takes place at every stage of your development. To make a shift from your present level to the next step, you keep putting in effort. The result doesn't come instantaneously, the result comes after a while. There's a time lag between the two. And in that period, you have to exercise what is known as patience. Unfortunately, the present generation has 0 patience. Before you put in the effort, you want to know when will the result come. No, be patient. And the assurance is this yogi will attain supreme bliss. 28.
Yunjan evam sadatmanam yogi vigata kalmashaha sukhena brahma samsparsham atyantam sukham ashnute.
Free from sin, the yogi who always practices union with Atman, self, easily obtains the unending bliss of union with Brahman. You see, he uses the word sukhena. Sukhena means easily, because you and I have this concept that realization, the spiritual path is very difficult. He says, no, it's sukhena. How long does it take to realize the self? Elsewhere he says, as long as a needle takes to penetrate a rose petal. But to get to that state takes time. So, in any field, whether you're a cricketer or you're in the field of music or acting or swimming or whatever it is, or even business, initially there's this great effort that you have to put in. And as you become comfortable with it, towards the end, when you become really expert at it, it's effortless. Isn't that true? In anything. When you look at it from outside, you look at a painting by M.F. Hussain, it seems, oh my God, how did he do it? But if you look at how he does it, at that stage of excellence, it's effortless. So you have to strive in the beginning, but towards the end, it becomes effortless. Once you are a master at it, it's sukhena. So here is a person who's put in the effort right from where? Chapter 1. And now he's in chapter 6, meditation. He's put in that effort, performed karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga. He's used his intellect to get his sense contact and likes and dislikes under control. And now he's well set. And the last stage is sukhena. He easily obtains the unending bliss of union with Brahman. Now this union with Brahman, what is the quantum of happiness that you get here? When he says infinite, you and I don't understand what infinite is. And therefore we are not motivated to it. So in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, he actually quantifies it. It's not true, but he gets us to that state. He says, 1 unit of human happiness he actually describes. He says where you have wealth, you have health, you have good looks, you have a wonderful family, you have etc. etc. Everything. That's one unit of happiness. 100 times that is what the Pitrus are your ancestors in heaven enjoy. 100 times that is the Gandharvas in a heaven slightly higher than that. 100 times that is the happiness that the celestials enjoy. 100 times that is the happiness that the eternal gods enjoy. 100 times that is, don't keep calculating, is what Prajapati, the creator, enjoys. 100 times that is the happiness that people in Brahmaloka experience. And he goes on, and then infinite is what you and I can experience here and now. If this also doesn't motivate you, doesn't matter. Next verse.
Sarvabhutastam Sarvabhutani Chatmani Ikshate Yoga Yuktatma Sarvatra Samadarshanaha.
Now in all these verses up to verse 28, he has taken us dramatically from how a finite, limited individual can get to that state of Brahma Bhuta, how he can become the Brahman. Now if you followed this, and assuming you've got there, how do you know that you've reached it? What is the test of realization is what he's giving in these 4 verses, 29 to 32. So he says, one merged with the self through yoga, with equality of vision everywhere. Sarvatra Samadarshanaha. Sees the self in all beings and all beings in the self. So the test of self-unfoldment, the test of spiritual development is that you should be able to see yourself in everyone and see everyone in you. What does this mean? What it means is, if you have identified with your body, you become a physical entity, you see maximum differences, right? You can't see oneness with your neighbor, you can't see oneness with your colleague, you can't see oneness even within the family. You rise to your mind, you become an emotional entity. Then what happens? A typical example of this is the mother with the child. Even as you're sitting here, the suggestion of your child is enough. I can see on all your faces. There's a peace, there's a happiness, there's a joy that you feel. And then what happens is, even whether the child is well behaved or the child is naughty, mischievous and is giving you a trouble, it doesn't matter to you. Even when the child is throwing a tantrum, the thought that he's my child is enough to keep you going. So have you seen mothers when the child is throwing a tantrum? She doesn't scream and she says, look at him, he's completely helpless. Can't control the child and yet is not able to garner put herself together to discipline the child. Why? Because this overbearing sense of love, oneness. So whatever the child does, in other words, whatever is coming out of the child, joy or sorrow, is still joyous to the mother. Right? You go one step further to the intellect. Say you identify with the country like Gandhiji did, then it didn't matter whether you were rich or poor, whether you were educated or uneducated, whether you were brilliant or dumb, whatever. As long as he looked at a countryman, another Indian, it gave him tremendous joy. You know, we experienced a little bit of that recently. After 2 months outside the country, the plane landed, and while we were waiting for our bags at the airport, there was this Air India employee, this ordinary fellow who came and started grumbling. How much to work, and there's a limit to how much we can take, and he went on and on and on. You know, it actually sounded like music to the ears. Because we weren't listening to the grumbling, we weren't listening to what he was saying. The only thing that registered is, after 2 months, and he spoke in Marathi, listening to an Indian language. After 2 months, you're seeing an Indian employee instead of that American twang. So that gave a thrill. Whether that thrill lasts after that is a different matter. Now, you go, what he's saying is, a person who has gone beyond the intellect also and identified with Atman understands all expressions from all beings, not just human beings, is nothing but Atman functioning. Right? When you understand that, then it doesn't matter what the expression is. Even if it's a person who's screaming and shouting, frothing and foaming, he understands it simply as, oh, what a magnificent expression of Atman. Right? So it doesn't affect you. And you see yourself in all beings and see all beings in yourself. You have to be able to stretch and understand what that state must be. That's why we went gradually. Let's get back. The mother, when she identified with her children, she sees equality, samadarshana. Between the 2 children that the mother has, her own children, each one has a distinct personality. The mother has the capacity of enjoying each one's personality without being judgmental, without being critical, without none of this. There is a samadarshana among the children, right? At the intellectual level, person who has become one with all people of his own nationality doesn't see any differences. As long as you're Indian, that's enough for him. You go to Atman, it is sarvatra samadarshana, everywhere, no exceptions. And what a thrill it must be giving a person. You see, you have to stretch to at least understand what it is. The Ishavasya Upanishad in Mantra 6 and 7 says exactly that. In Mantra 6 he says, such a person who sees himself in all beings and all beings in the self, the first thing that happens is Tataha na vijugupsate. Such a person doesn't feel vijugupsa. Vijugupsa is one word in Sanskrit that has no translation in English. Vijugupsa is a combination of hatred, repulsion, revulsion, all the negativities put together is vijugupsa. Right? You and I, when we interact with other human beings, even if he's a divine person, a very fine person, you look for something negative and get repulsed, get revolted by the person. Yeah? The first sign of spiritual development is this vijugupsa goes. Because even when the negativities show, you have a compassionate view of the person. You have an all-inclusive view of the person. And this is what he's talking about. So there are people who say, oh, I'm very spiritual. But then, first thing is you're obsessed only with yourself. And second thing, you see all negativities in people. One person is materialistic, second person is something else, third person is so on and so forth. As against this, you take the heartening, very fine view that Swami Ramatirtha took towards people. Someone came and asked him, says, you look at this businessman, he's so greedy, he's not content with what he has. What have you to say to that? And he says, of course he'll be greedy. You know why? Because he's infinite. How will he be satisfied with anything that is finite? What a magnanimous view of even negativities. This is something that we need to strive towards. So, one who sees himself in all beings and all beings in the self is merged with the self through yoga. This is the quality control. Next verse, 30.
Yo mam pashyati sarvatra sarvam cha mai pashyati tasyaham na pranashyami sacha me na pranashyati.
One who sees me everywhere and sees everything in me neither loses me nor is lost to me. So what he's saying is, once you gain that perception of this overwhelming sense of oneness, it never leaves you. You become one with it. It's permanent. And another example that he gives is in the Upanishad, is that he says, your vision of reality, your vision of Atman, the self, even while you're interacting with the world, with the body, mind and intellect, is something like this. And he's a brilliant example that he gives. He says it's like blinking your eyelids. While you're seeing, just now you're seeing, right? Every now and then your eyelids shut and open, shut and open. But is your vision of the world obstructed every time you blink? No. Your vision of the world is constant in spite of the blinking of your eyelids. And somehow, I don't know how this happens, this constancy of vision is there. And this is exactly what that realized soul experiences. Just as your eyelids shut and open every now and then, and still your vision is constant, that man of realization operates with the body, the mind and the intellect and transacts with the world, but his vision of the self remains constant. What does this mean from our perspective? See, every time you read a verse, any idea that the Gita gives, you must instantly bring it down to your level, only then it makes sense. Otherwise you fall asleep. Fortunately, nobody is asleep here. So what happens is, bring it down to your level. From our perspective, every moment of our life, it doesn't matter where you are or what you're doing or what you're experiencing, there is something, this divine force is staring you in the face. You've got to be able to see it. You have to be able to align with it. Wherever you go, whatever you do, if you're able to align with it, you are in a constant state of exhilaration, irrespective of what the world has to offer. And this state of exhilaration, again, let's go back to, only poets can explain this. In that poem called Daffodils, when he functions in a spirit of service, when he aligns himself with this divine force, then wherever he goes, whatever he does, he sees this. He's speaking of the daffodils in this poem, Daffodils. He says, he's going along doing whatever he has to do, and then suddenly he sees this host of golden daffodils beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. And then he continues to describe this state of exhilaration that we're talking about. He says, continuous as the stars that shine. And he compares it. He looks up at the stars and he still finds that these daffodils are around, and twinkle on the Milky Way. They stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. This vision that you and I also see flowers. It's not as if he saw 10,000 and you and I are seeing only one or two. It's the perception. I don't know how to explain it. Then he says, the waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. See, this is the thing. When you identify and when you align with nature, the forces of nature, then you remain in this state of exhilaration. And then he says, I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. So at the time that you have this alignment, you don't understand what power it has. And then he says, when he goes back, for oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood. When you go back and you carry the memory of this alignment with Atman, you are in vacant and in pensive mood. Vacant of thoughts of the world, pensive in thought of reality. They flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude, the jnana chakshu, the third eye that Vedanta speaks of. The equation is so clear, he must have studied the Vedanta. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. This is that state of oneness that he's talking about. So he's using poetically, using daffodils to get across how you can reach that state of oneness where you are not lost to that entity and that entity is never lost to you. 31.
सर्वभूतस्थितं यो मां भजत्येकत्वमास्थितः सर्वथा वर्तमानोऽपि स योगी मयि वर्तते.
In this verse, he confirms and establishes that vision. Look at the flow of thought from 29 onwards. He says, that yogi who, rooted in oneness, worships me, dwelling in all beings, lives in me, whatever be his lifestyle. In verse 29, he used the word ikshate, which means sees. He sees himself in all beings and all beings in the self. In verse 30, he uses the word pashyati, means sees again. But here, in this verse, he changes and he uses the word bhajati, which means worship. One is a theoretical, the first 29th verse is a theoretical thing. You see yourself in all beings and all beings in the self is very neutral. In verse 30, there's a little more punch in that verse. It says, he is not lost to me, nor am I lost to him. There's a permanence in that. Here he nails it by saying such a person worships. When you see that divine force operating everywhere in the world, you automatically get into a worshipful attitude, worshipful mode. Whom do you worship? You don't go to a temple and worship a piece of stone that is there. You worship God's creation. As Muhammad said, you can't love God's beings, then where are you going to go and love something that you yourself have created? That's what we're doing. If you say you love God in a temple and you don't love people around you who have been created by the murtis created by God you don't like, murti created by yourself you go and worship. Absurd. So you must reach a state where you are worshipping every single creature in the world as God's creation. And that automatically happens. When you're rooted in that oneness, you worship the Lord dwelling in all beings. Such a person lives in me irrespective of what his lifestyle is. You know, you see the best of people in the most unusual places. A cobbler who's fixing the shoes. A man who's breaking stones on the roadside. Who's toiling away. A doctor working in his clinic, a comedian, an actor, wherever you go, whatever you do, you see nothing but expressions of divinity. That's one. But even essential goodness you see in the most unusual places. This sattvic nature. And a person who's able to align with this finds lessons everywhere in it. That's what we saw on the first day. As Shakespeare said, you find sermons in stones, good in everything. So this capacity to zero in on what is good in a person and learn from it and get a joy out of it, get excitement out of it, is something that is well within our reach. Never mind seeing Atman, never mind seeing the divine force, that will take time. But what we can certainly do is train ourselves to see goodness in people. And you have a maid coming to your house to do basic work. Have you ever seen what kind of life they lead? Compared to that, what joy they have. They come and smile at you first thing in the morning when they have nothing to smile for. And you and I have everything going and yet you're pulling long faces. How is this person who stays in the back of beyond and struggles in a second-class train compartment packed like sardines and walks 1.5 miles to your home, how can that person smile? That itself is a miracle. And if you can't see goodness in that person, all you do is shout and say, you haven't done this properly and you haven't done that properly. And the maid doesn't even have it in her power to to talk back. You know, Tukaram, Sant Tukaram, he had lost everything, and some good soul took pity on him and said, okay, I'm going out of town and you look after my fields while I'm gone. So Tukaram said, okay. And while he was sitting there, ostensibly to look after the fields, he got into this ecstasy of God consciousness, and he went into a realm of his own. And what happened was some rivals of his, people who didn't like him,